I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. We know that with the tail end of the 4th of July, people are just getting back into their lives again. And it's going to be an exciting presentation. We have Mr. Glenn LeBlanc, who is just a phenomenal, phenomenal teacher. He is so passionate about what he's teaching all of us right now on how these stem cells work, why we need them, and how our bodies are going to really be able to move and just be perform at a higher level. And Glenn actually has been in the health industry for over 30 something years, and he has been so helpful. Everyone, please mute themselves, please. Let's do that. Thank you. I appreciate it. So anyway, we want to welcome Glenn, and may y'all really get your pen and paper out and really take some great notes. Glenn?
Thank you, Desiree. And good afternoon, everybody. Glad to see everybody here tonight. Always exciting to share this information that we've been blessed with, and we continue to watch week in and week out more and more people being helped by this technology, and spreading the word is certainly something we enjoy doing for that reason. So I'm not going to go any further, but to get started with our presentation tonight, explaining how all of this works. So let me go ahead and share my screen here and get this started. And here we go. Everybody can see it? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Alrighty, good. So stem cell therapy and the technology that we're using to get it into people's their stem cells active. And the LifeWave Corporation and David Smith, who is the inventor and the scientist behind this, has really touched off a completely different revolutionary way of administering this therapy. So if our topics tonight, so that we understand how this all works, we'll touch on how that works, the GHK copper peptide, and its link to this whole process. Of course, we'll spend the majority of our time talking about stem cells, and we will finish talking about water and how it interacts with this process. So, energy and light waves. All energy that comes off the sun comes in a form of a wavelength of light. We think of light in the visible spectrum, which you can see right here is a very small section, but all of the different wavelengths are considered light energy and light waves. We're going to be concentrating on this infrared section tonight, which has a tremendous amount, over 1 million wavelengths within that spectrum alone. But it's important to understand a few things about energy and how we're going to use it. So let's talk about refract. Refracting is the process by which, and is easily understood, if we take white light in our visible spectrum and we put it through a prism, we can separate it into its individual wavelengths, which we then see as the different colors of our light spectrum. Each of those colors has a certain wavelength. Now, the infrared spectrum we can't see visibly, but we can use infrared cameras and detect it. Obviously, some beings on this planet, like nocturnal animals, can see certain areas of infrared. Even our dogs and cats see in certain areas of infrared, which allows them to run through the house in the middle of the night and not bump into things because they're actually seeing. If we look at infrared cameras or night vision goggles where they're detecting infrared wavelengths, it separates into different colors based on the wavelength and the temperature of in this case, the body that it's looking at. And one of the things I wanted to show you is this section right in here on the back of the neck, which we will talk about later, which is just showing you a very, very warm spot. And of course, our heart and our lungs and major arteries to our brain all fall in this area. So we've known for thousands of years that specific frequencies of light can cause changes within our body. If we go out in the sun, we know that certain frequencies in the ultraviolet range will cause our skin to produce vitamin D. But that's just one of the many chemicals that our skin produces when different wavelengths hit it. I mean, the skin is the largest organ in our body, and it's one that produces more chemicals and enzymes and protein building materials than any other organ in our body. So we're going to work with that. Um, and again, another frequency in the infrared, I mean, in the ultraviolet produces melanin, which is tans our skin and helps protect it from further sun exposure. So LifeWave has patented a technology that is based on that basic scientific principle. We're going to explain to you how it works. One of the things that a specific frequency of the infrared range does is it causes our skin to produce a peptide, the GHK peptide, and it happens naturally. And one of the great things is that because our body's producing the peptide within us, we don't have any problems with it. We don't get overdose levels. It reaches natural blood serum saturation levels. And that is very different than if we try to take this in an injection or we take it in supplements. Those are not bioidentical to what our body can create, and consequently there are issues. And one of the main issues is it just doesn't respond. But one of the unfortunate parts is that we saturate, or I guess we reach our peak production of this peptide when we're about 20 years old, and then it begins to fall off in our ability to produce it. So by the time we're 30 years old, we've already lost almost 60% of the production of this peptide. And when we go into showing you all the things that this peptide does and how it is important it is to the functionality of our stem cells, you'll see why that is a problem, but we're going to have a solution to that problem. So let's just talk a few minutes about all the benefits that the peptide itself. One thing, explain to you what a peptide is. If we take amino acids and our bodies use background basic amino acids to produce all the different proteins and peptides that we use throughout our system, the definition that separates a peptide from a protein is if there are 50 or more amino acids that are combined, that is called the protein. If it's under 50, it's referred to as the same. So let's talk about this particular one, because this is where all of our energy is going to be spent here tonight. The GHK, which is the 3 different amino acids that ultimately bonds with a mineral, and almost all peptides and proteins ultimately bond with minerals because it's the mineral that is the catalyst for the chemical reactions throughout our system that the peptide can produce. So one of the things is this incredible list of things that just the peptide itself does. It attracts immune cells to areas, reduces inflammation, increases hair growth and thickness, can also alleviate and help with pain, anxiety, and aggression. Its anti-aging and skincare benefits include improved elasticity, reduced photo damage from other wavelengths of light from the sun, reduce fine lines and wrinkles, and it does that by improving the collagen matrix. Collagen is it is actually the largest produced protein in our body, and it is part of all of our connective tissue throughout. This peptide can also improve bone density, repair, and rejuvenate nerve connectivity within the brain. All of us, as we're aging, we certainly could use that help. And down regulate over 6,000 genes. And we'll talk about why that is so important later on, because as we age, different genes tend to switch on or off and cause problems that we weren't having prior to that change. And the peptide is responsible for either maintaining genes in their normal structure or has the ability to revert them back to where they were at a younger age when we had much higher levels of the peptide in our system. It is capable of repairing lung tissue in people with COPD, DNA repair. So all of the free radical damage that takes place in our body that damages DNA, this is one of the body's mechanisms of repairing that. Nerve regeneration, and I'm going to show you some pictures of that activity. It's got anti-cancer effects, and one of the key and as important as any of the other these benefits is that it stimulates the proliferation of exosomes production in stem cells. And we'll talk about how that works and why, what are exosomes and what they do for us. So let's get into the heart of the study tonight, and that is stem cells and what they can do for us, or what they should say. One thing right from the beginning is understand that stem cell research is the most studied area in all of science today. Billions and billions of dollars have been spent and continue to be spent. And at present, there's over 6,500 clinical trials being conducted worldwide on stem cell research. Easy to find, clinicaltrials.gov, and you can read to your heart's content. Now, we've heard of and know of some people who have had stem cell therapy. Shaquille O'Neal, Tiger Woods, Peyton Manning. Peyton probably is one of the ones that we may recognize the most, especially if you're a football fan, where we know he broke his neck in a game. They weren't sure that he was going to regain feeling in his lower part of his body, much less heal to a point where he could walk and play again. Now, Peyton ended up going to Germany to have some stem cell therapy done, and it did exactly what they were hoping it would do. It not only regenerated the strength in the bone structure of the broken area of the neck, it re-stimulated the growth of all of the nerve cells that were damaged in the area and replaced them. Consequently, not only was he able to get his feeling back and walk again, but able to bring his skill level all the way back to playing a number of additional years in the Pro Football League. Now, the unfortunate part of this is, for everybody else, I should say, is that he had to go to Germany to get this done. It is not approved here in the United States. These treatments are extremely expensive. The treatment that Peyton went through, $125,000, in addition to, I think it was almost 8 months, he had to live in Germany, so add those expenses to the thing. This takes it out of the reach of the average person. So that's a problem. As great as these results can be and have been in a number of different trials and studies and treatments, if it's not available to the average person, well, then you and I, what good does it do for us, right? So we're going to look at some other issues. So the stem cell revolution in general, every disease that's being studied today, they're looking at stem cells and how they can work in the recovery or the changing of those diseases. Cancer is all moving in that direction, where they can stimulate stem cells to take place either from the cancer itself or from some of the treatments that they have used in the past that do so much damage to the system. But let's look at some of these things. So obviously everybody would love to look and feel and live younger. Then as we continue to age, we remember the days of our youth and how much more energy we had, how we recovered quicker. Um, we didn't have the aches and pains, or the aches and pains didn't last long. If we did get them, that happened to us later in life, and all of that becomes evident because of the reduction in stem cell activity within our body. Stem cells are the key. If we can activate them, they will start doing that repair and bring us back to those youthful years where our body was constantly repairing itself. Um, they're a vital part of our immune system, and that certainly is something that we all, especially after this last year, we've all been very aware of the importance of maintaining a good immune system. But we see that even before all of that, where the older a person got, the likelihood of them succumbing to different diseases becomes more and more evident. And it is, again, because the immune system is being compromised and it can't repair itself because of the lack of stem cell activity. So stem cells, let's just talk about them in their generality, some fundamentals. Stem cells differ than other cells in our body because of three general properties. They are capable of dividing and renewing themselves for extremely long periods of time. And when we say long periods of time, we're talking about well beyond what we even consider a long life. You know, if we get people into their 90s or early hundreds, we consider that extremely old. But stem cells can stay active or actually stay present and still be be available, not necessarily active, but available well into your 120 and 130. So that's what we're talking about by the ability to renew themselves for long periods of time, our entire life, if we can keep them active. They are unspecialized tissue, so they're not a brain cell, they're not a liver cell or a lung cell. They are a stem cell. But the beauty of that is that they can rise and change themselves into any specialized cell within our body. Um, so as we damage tissue or injure tissue, no matter where it is, stem cells can go to and either repair that damage or actually turn themselves from a stem cell into this specified tissue and replace that damaged cell and constantly take care of the normal wear and tear that takes place. Now, the process begins with their ability to communicate with each other. We can explain that. And that communication is done with exosomes. So let's tell you what exosomes are all about. So an exosome is an extracellular vehicle. It's basically a cytokine that is an RNA messenger. Our DNA is our blueprint of our body, and RNA is what controls it. So if we compare that to a computer, um, the DNA is the hard drive and the R the operating system. So one of the things that unfortunately happens is exosomes decline, and they decline because they require the GHK copper peptide in order to be produced by the mother stem cells. Since we lose that peptide production in our system quite young in our life, as that peptide reduced in our blood serum, so does the production of exosomes, and then the stem cells don't stay active. And when I talk about go down, we look at age 30, about 60%, at age 60, 65, lost about 90%. And at age 70, we can almost not find any stem cell activity and production of exosomes. So consequently, at those ages, as things deteriorate, they're not being replaced or repaired. So we just continue to go further and further downhill. So if we injure ourselves or a tissue is damaged for any reason, it has the ability to give off a chemical signal, a beacon that goes throughout the bloodstream in an attempt to recruit stem cells to the area to do its repair. But it also has a very specific signal of what that injury is. And exosomes, or here's a, let me step back a second. Here's a picture of a mother stem cell. And all the little hair-like follicles that are around the cell are what can capture that chemical signal given off by an injury or a damaged tissue within our body. And the mother stem cell creates an exosome, which is that little RNA operating system, and it produces it in a very specific way that is fingerprinted to the damage, so that when the worker stem cells go out and repair that damage, they know exactly what to do when they get to the wound site. So in this picture, we'll take the green stem cell, we'll call that the mother stem cell. It's creating these little RNA messenger packets that are very specific to the injury because they read that chemical signal. They extrude them into the bloodstream. Worker stem cells then capture them, and they become programmed to what needs to be repaired. They can also follow that chemical signal back to the injury site. So there's our breadcrumb trail back to the wound or the damaged tissue. And then those worker stem cells are programmed specifically to fix that problem. And that's how that process works. If mother stem cells are not creating exosomes, which they can't do if we have very low levels of the GHK copper peptide, then there is the worker stem cells are all sitting on the bench waiting for instructions of what to go do, which they never get, and nothing gets accomplished. So what can stem cells actually do within us? Well, there's been years that they've said if you had damage in that knee, that low blood supply area of cartilage would never regrow. And it's a very used joint, so we continue to damage it. Even if there's a small amount of repair taking place, we tend to damage it as fast as we can repair it. So the only alternative was a knee replacement. Or if you had nerve damage, you were not going to regenerate those nerves. Or in COPD, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more specific specificity in a minute. As that lung tissue was damaged, we lost it, and there was nothing you could do to regenerate it. Well, actually, there is something you can do. Stem cells have the capability of going in and making those repairs as long as they're active. So that was the challenge. Here's an X-ray of a nerve. This is the green part is the nerve, and there was some damage inflammation. That's the high spots, these little bright areas. And so the body's recruiting all of these little red things, which are all stem cells, to come into the area to repair that damage. So we were able to watch it happen if we can stimulate those cells. So now we're going to look at stem cell therapy with neuropathy. Now, neuropathy is for whatever reason, whether it be injury, whether it be diabetes, whatever, the destruction of nerve endings. And of course, nerve endings control blood flow to areas, feeling, all of the things that we obviously associate with nerves. Pain could be also. But in this case, I want to show you a picture of this gentleman or this person's feet. And I used an old back in 2002 because this was when stem cell therapy was just really coming of age, and it was early in its infancy. And I wanted to show you what kind of results they were getting back then, and we get far greater results today. But in this case, the left foot, you could see all of the nerve activity and blood flow. And then, but in the right foot, very, very little. I don't know if it was from the damage, from losing that toe, or what the situation was, but you can see very little activity. With just 14 days of stem cell therapy, not only did we improve the vascularity and nerve endings throughout the left foot, but look at the improvement that took place in the right foot, which that was almost non-existent before. So just some showing you some things that can take place. Now, blood vessel growth. Again, here's a picture A. In this case, we had some blockage right here. You can see how thin that is. And of course, the blood flow down beyond that area was much more limited, which again, just with a few weeks in 24 weeks in this cell therapy, look at the additional vascularity that grew. We got outlying, alternative vascular response to that area, feeding this area down below that was almost void of blood flow prior to that. So it can regrow blood vessels or increase the blood vessels. And here's another look here with the small amount of vascularity here and the improvement within that 24-week period. COPD. COPD is one of the highest, it's in the top 3 killers of people today. What actually is it? If we look at a healthy lung, we have the bronchiole that brings air down through from our mouth all the way down to the lung. And inside the lung, we have the alveoli. Those are the little air sacs that exchange gas. So there's blood supply to them, and they release carbon dioxide into that little air sac and take the oxygen out of it, bring it into the blood supply, the exchange of gas. Well, in a person with COPD, which is some kind of damage, it could have been from smoking, it could be from toxins in the air, it can be from what the asbestos, whatever the situation, whenever we inflame any area that has mucus in it, it tends to produce more mucus as a protective measure. So we've already got a thinned bronchial, and then it produces mucus that clogs it up even further, reducing the amount of airflow down to the alveoli. But in this case, the walls of the alveoli have been destroyed. And so we have scar tissue in here. This lobe, this air sac is no longer exchanging gases. And so we've lost its ability to perform. Now, what ultimately happens is that that goes and gets worse and worse. We're depriving the body of oxygen levels. We're not getting rid of the CO2, which increases the acidity level within the body, which causes a whole series of other problems. One of being the utilization of oxygen within the cells, and organs being starved for oxygen begin to deteriorate. And ultimately, COPD patients die of organ failures because their organs just literally don't get enough oxygen to survive, basically. So I'm going to show you some checks, pulmonary pictures of a damaged set of lungs. And here they are. So the areas that are not damaged are black. And you can see very little percentage is solid black. Everything that's marbled or shaded or white is scar tissue, and those are damaged alveoli or non-productive at all. And you can see certainly in this left side, tremendous amount of the lung. If we add this up, this person's got less than 15% of their ability to exchange gas. After stem cell therapy, we have not only stopped the progression of whatever's damaged that, but we've actually replaced and repaired all of the damaged tissue. This is the same set of lungs as this after the therapy. So now this person's got tremendous amount of ability to breathe and get. Those are some of the things that stem cells are capable of doing if we can keep them active. Now, the unfortunate part is, as we get older, we less active. We're not all going out and running every day. So we don't actually realize that our lung capacity is being diminished. And it's not until damage is pretty severe and extensive that we starting having symptoms that cause us to even go get diagnosed with this problem. There's over 15 million diagnosed people at this point, and probably at least that many who are undiagnosed. And so one of the things we want to also bring to mind is not waiting until the symptoms are severe enough to us to realize that the damage is done, but taking some proactive measures in activating our stem cells so that they, as the damage takes place, rather than trying to repair, 60, 70% of the lung tissue, which would take a far longer period of time. And sometimes people don't have the luxury of time to do that. So a proactive state here. Same thing with blood vessels. Our heart vessels don't block up from yesterday till today. It's a long process over decades, and we notice it when we have either a heart attack or chest pains because it's gotten to the point where we just can't pass enough blood through that area. And blockages take place in damaged areas of arteries, which is why the whole artery doesn't close down. It's specific little spots in the artery because that's a spot that was damaged. So if we can repair it as the damage takes place before it gets to a critical state, well, then we're doing well, and we will extend the life of that individual. So the good news with pulmonary disease is that we can heal damaged lung tissue with stem cell activity. We can grow new blood vessels, not only in hearts, but in other organs that may have damage in them, who have scar tissue in them. Even just blood flow to lower extremities that could be getting clogged. Stem cell therapy can repair those things. And we saw some of those healings in the pictures of the neuropathy. Now, we talked earlier about the ability of the peptide to modulate genes. So let me explain that a little bit, give you an analogy. Many of us have heard of somebody who loves shellfish, whether it be shrimp or crab or lobster, and they've eaten it all their life. And one day they go out and have some, and they come home with, tightening throat, big lips, face swelling. What changed from one time to the other? Well, the gene that sensitivity was in a certain position when they were younger, and it is modulated over. It's either turned off or turned on, one way or the other, depending on which way it was that was controlling that issue, that inflammatory response. The same thing happens in rheumatoid arthritis. Those are damages to gene modulations that all of a sudden cause our bodies to start attacking our own joints and doing horrible amounts of damage. So that GHK peptide has the ability to remodulate those genes back to where they were, hence stopping, in this case, in rheumatoid arthritis, the damage that our bodies, actually our immune system, is doing to our own joints, and not only stopping the damage, the peptide, but then activating the stem cells to go in and repair the damage and actually see improvement. Now, again, depending on how bad the situation is the amount of time it would take for that whole process to begin. But we start seeing changes quite often really quick, because the peptide has the ability to reduce inflammation. That's one of the main issues joint deterioration causes, obviously. And that's where a lot of the pain comes from. So, just in the first few days, we've had people who see relief in pain, a little bit greater flexibility, ability to use the joint a little bit better. And that's probably because of less swelling in it and all of those issues. And then over time, they get regeneration of that damaged joint, because number one, they're not either damaging it any longer, or the amount of damage is being reduced dramatically, and the stem cells have the ability to come in with time and repair that damage. So, immunomodulation is critically important, and it's one of the jobs that the peptide does. And again, without any intervention, we lose a lot of that ability real quickly. So now let's separate commercially produced exosomes from other therapies. What is the difference? So almost all of the stem cell treatments that are being used throughout the world today come from injecting exosomes into a damaged area, like a knee. Do this? Well, primarily they're getting them from umbilical cords. They're getting stem cells that are active within umbilical cords. And it's a time where they're extremely active because of that exchange process from mother to baby. They are adult stem cells, be clear about that also. They are the mother stem cells. That chemicals within the baby, actually, after the placenta implants itself into the uterus, the baby actually starts producing certain chemicals that stimulate the mother's production of exosomes within the stem cells in um, her body, as well as in the umbilical cord. So umbilical cords are readily available. They're always just disposed of. So they can take those and they look for stem cells that are producing exosomes, the mother stem cells, not the work ones. And they isolate them. They then grow them by encouraging them to produce more exosomes. And they do that by literally bathing them in a solution of the GHK copper peptide. So they produce massive amounts of exosomes. They then capture the exosomes in the millions, and that's what they're injecting into a person. That's what stimulates the person's stem cells to become active and do the repair. The problem is a few. Number one, you're injecting a foreign body into you. So sometimes our body rejects that and kills them off, and they don't do anything. Number two, those exosomes that have been produced are being produced without a signature of damage So they're not being specifically produced to repair the damage that's in the person they're going to be put into. They're just general. Now, you're injecting them into the area that the damage is, so they can't help but bump into the damage, and they will begin to stimulate some activity. But again, very expensive. You know, injections can cost in excess of $10,000, and in a lot of cases, multiple injections are necessary to see any results. So it again takes it away from the average person's ability to get this therapy. And insurance companies aren't covering this at all, so it's all out of pocket. Um, so as we were talking about injections, they are expensive, they're risky because they can cause reactions because indeed you're putting a foreign body into your system. They're controversial, which is why the U.S. government hasn't approved so many of these uh, treatments that are being done in other areas of the world because they're just not convinced that the benefit outweighs the risks that come along. There is no guarantee of any results, and that is stated right up front from anybody who's doing any of these injections, because again, like I said, our body can react to those uh, injections as foreign bodies. Our immune system goes in, wipes out all of the exosomes, and then there's none there to do any good. So you've gone through this entire process, which is not only time consuming, extremely expensive, in most cases outside the country to get it done, and then you get no results whatsoever. So there's part of the non. And then with that, there's a solid 20% failure rate. So there's not a whole lot of things the FDA approves with those kinds of failure rates. So here comes David Smith. So he's the founder and the CEO of Life Waves. His background is in phototherapy. He has studied for 35 years, breaking down different wavelengths of light in different areas of the light spectrum and what they do within the body. So David took an entire different approach to all the different studies that were being done throughout the world. And unfortunately, a lot of times as scientists get a new discovery, then other scientists now have that information and they can compound on that. They can build on that foundation. The unfortunate part of that is then those studies tend to go down one avenue because they're all working to build off of that foundation. And you don't get people in a lot of cases exploring other ways to reach that. So there's been a lot of work showing that the GHK peptide stimulates stem cell activity. And a lot of that research had been done on using supplements to increase the amount of the GHK peptide in the bloodstream, and to not a whole lot of success because a supplement in that case isn't bioidentical, as I was saying earlier, to the peptide that your body would create, because it creates it for yourself and you're the one creating it. So your body works with that very well. The supplements really weren't giving them a lot of effect. And in some cases, they were causing some toxicity buildup because the body couldn't use them properly or get rid of them properly. So injections of the GHK copper peptide and or supplements taken orally were not solving the problem. So David looked at it as, well, we know that we can photomodulate our skin to produce all kinds of chemicals. It is how we produce it. Our skin produces that peptide on its own. And so his research went into why are we not producing it any longer as we age? And is there a way to stimulate that production again? And through the phototherapy patches that he developed, he found a specific wavelength that was the hardest part in the millions of wavelengths in the infrared. And he wasn't sure initially that the infrared was where he was looking. So obviously looking in all kinds of areas, that he found the wavelength that stimulated the skin to produce this peptide. So, sorry, I went the wrong way here. So we're looking at someone with over 70 patents in phototherapy, 30 plus patents still pending, um, leading edge in phototherapy research, and now has over 80 clinical trials proving the effectiveness of the lightwave phototherapy patch. So let's look at exactly how this works. Um, this is basically what I was just saying in the last slide, is if we are able to get the skin to produce the peptide again, it bring those levels back up to when we were much younger. We basically reset our own stem cells and give them the ability to go in and do the specific repair as little as 24 hours. There was just a recent study that this doctor did that I'm trying to get the specifics on, that I will actually add to this presentation for next month. But she was showing through numerous blind studies the effectiveness of this patch on increasing the amount of blood serum levels of the GHK copper peptide, and how quickly in 24 hours, in 36 hours, and then in a week, how much it went up. And the amount of increase was 30+% in the first 24 hours. So we understand why people get almost instant response when they start using one of these patches, because within the first 24 hours, they have already increased that peptide level in their blood system by 30+%. And in doing so, all of that list of things we talked about in the first few slides, reduction of inflammation and all of those things, begin to happen immediately. So we see people reduce pain, or pain going away, reduction in inflammation, all of those things happening within the first few days of beginning. And it takes about 4 to 5 days for the GHK peptide to then bond with copper. And it is that at that time that it becomes available for stem cells to use to make the exosomes that are going to bring the activity of stem cells together. So in the first week, let's say, we get all of the great beneficial effects of the peptide itself. And then after 5 to 7 days, the stem cells begin to do their job and start repairing damage. And so we see a much greater increase in the productivity of the whole response. And, in 30 days, in all of the people I've dealt with over the last year, not one person has not had results in some fashion within the first 30 days, enough for them to continue using this. And again, we have to have proper expectations. We didn't wear the cartilage out in our knee in the last week. We didn't, block arteries and cause damage in arteries it's decades worth of progression. We can't expect it to all get fixed in a week either. So with proper expectations, but we can see, and we have clinical proof that it is indeed doing what it's supposed to do. So in January of 2019 is when David released this patch. The size of a quarter. The center of it is an amino acid, plant-based amino acid crystalline structure that's sandwiched between 2 layers of cellulose, again, plant-based cellulose, that encapsulate that. So nothing in the patch ever gets transported into our skin. Our skin absorbs just about everything it touches. But since there is nothing in the patch that can get through to the skin, then we don't absorb anything from it. Now, that's important for a number of reasons. Number one, we're not adding anything to our system. It cannot, so there's nothing to interfere with or get in the way or interact with medication somebody may be taking or any other thing. So it is perfectly safe to use. The only thing it does is it takes infrared heat, infrared light waves that our bodies produce as heat. And as they go into the patch, the crystalline structure refracts those waves, in other words, separates them into their individual light waves. And then knowing the exact wavelength that we need, there is part of the structure that then bends it and reflects it back into our skin, which then activates the production of the copper peptide, producing the results. So this patch hit the market in January of 2019. Um, Certainly historical because the clinical trials that were done proving that it does indeed what it says it does were already done, a lot of them, and they continue more and more of them to be done to prove it in even greater capacity from there. It also put the technology in the hands of the average person because it is very affordable for them to be able to use. So we now bring stem cell treatment to anybody and everybody in the world that not only wants it but needs it. He was able to do what multi-billion dollar companies in big pharma were not able to and still till today have not done. It is patented one-of-kind technology, so they're not going to do it this way. They'll have to continue to look at other ways that they've been developing. Um, and a patent, for example, if you don't know how difficult patents are to get, number one, you have to prove that you have a unique product, that you're not patenting somebody else's technology or idea. So it's got to be unique to you. You've had to develop it. The second thing is you have to prove it does what you say it's going to do. And it's why most patents take 5, 7, 10 years to come about, is because that process of proving those things through trials um, just take a long time to verify and make sure. Well, David was able to achieve his patent on the X39, which is the stem cell activating patch, within 18 months, actually 15 months. They got that in March of 2020, and it was released in January of 19. So record time, because the clinical trials proved it did exactly what we just got finished talking about. It took light, reflected it back into the skin started producing the peptide, bringing the blood serum levels to a much more youthful position and activating stem cells. So there is no competition for this. This technology can only be purchased through them. Um, and if you would like to read some of those, x39clinicalstudies.com, you can read to your heart's content, because there's days and days, if not months, worth of data in there that you can read. But if the science side of things is important to you, that's where you can go to get that information. Athletes of all over are taking and using these. There are a number of reasons. They're not putting anything into their systems or doesn't violate any of the chemical abuse issues that they have to deal with. And there are other patches in addition to this one. The company was 15 years old when they developed this patch and was highly successful up until that time. And along the way, David found other wavelengths that stimulated other things like melatonin and different chemicals that our body uses for sleep, for energy production, for other different types of things. So there's a whole list of patches that were being utilized in the sports uh, industry, as well as individuals, doctors prescribing them to patients all over the country because of what they're able to do. But the one that is really was his goal was the stem cell active patch, the X39, and we've had that for about a year and a half. One of our Olympic trial tennis players um, just won her route to the Olympics, and she had X39 and energy patches on in her match. So you could see them stuck to her shoulder and back of her neck and things. So athletes are definitely using these, and they see greater and quicker recovery with the heavy exercise and routines that they do, the amount of energy, all of the different things that come with uh, that kind of youthful regeneration. And it's allowing athletes to compete far later in their careers, where they would normally, it would be a young man's sport. We're seeing more and more people, pro football people, who are playing into their 40s. Uh, Brady is a perfect example of that, because of the ability of their bodies to repair like they did when they were in their 20s with the utilization of some of these technologies. The X39 has proven to increase sleep deep sleep in particular. Um, and one of the things that happens in our deep sleep, when we're sleeping, we don't know if we're in restful sleep, non-restful sleep, REM sleep. There's all different things within our sleep. If we're sleeping, we think we're sleeping and we're getting rest, but we're not necessarily. If we're not in restful sleep, our bodies aren't repairing. And if we don't go into REM sleep, one of the things that happens when we come out of REM is our body then produces uh, the human growth hormone, another part of revitalizing different aspects of systems throughout our body. So one of the things they found very quickly, and we've been able to verify that with some of our own studies, with some sleep companies that we've been working with, is that within the first 24 hours, we can increase a person who was only getting about 60% of their sleep was restful sleep and push it into the high 80s to low 90% range within the first 24 hours of using the patch. So sleep, and then of course sleep is a big part of it's the time of the day, of the 24 hours that we do our repair. So if we're not getting deep restful sleep, we're not repairing. Um, Wrinkle reduction, because like I said, collagen being the most produced protein in our body, is involved in the connective tissue throughout our body. As our body produces less quality of uh, that protein, well, then we get wrinkles and we get skin tight, sagging and things, and into organs where blood vessels aren't as strong, they're not as flexible. So we have all of the issues that come along with that. Well, the X39 can reduce that in as little as 4 to 12 weeks. And we see, and I'm going to show you some pictures of those kinds of results. But it gives you an idea of what's happening on the inside when we can see it this easily on the outside. So let's take our picture on the left. Here's a lady that you can see some lines beginning in her brow, certainly around her nose and mouth, and in her neck area. After a short period of time of using the X39, you're starting to see a change in that tissue, and especially visible here in her neck. Lines, the skin just tightening because of the improved matrix of the collagen that's making up all of our connective tissue. Here's another lady, and here's a picture of her on day one. Again, lines in the neck, the jowl, around the mouth. This is 30 days in, certainly some improvement there, especially up in this part of her face. And then after 4.5 months, you see a tremendous difference. Now, we're not going to be 12 again, but that's the kind of improvement within very short periods of time. And this is probably my favorite. Here's a lady that on day one was in her latter 50s, beginning to get some forehead, certainly some sagging under the eyes, and the upper lid beginning to sag down and cover the top part of that, and then her neck and mouth. So here's 42 days in, and one of the things you see is certainly some change around the eyes, but look at the upper lid beginning to pull back and separate, allowing the eye to open a little bit further. Um, and then you've seen some neck change, but here's the great thing. After 1 year of using the patches, look at the difference in that skin structure. So those are the kinds of very visible mind having also, but it's the kind of repair that's taking place both inside and out. Hair growth was certainly not something they were looking at, but it ends up being part of it, and a nice benefit, especially for people who, like myself, lost mine at a pretty young age. And here's some pictures of people before and then after using. You can see it didn't bring them into full thick hair, but it certainly improved the amount. And especially in this person, after a year of using it, he filled in quite a bit. So just some other things that scar reduction, again, it goes back to the remodeling of scars because of the collagen matrix, when that scar was produced. And I've got some scars from some surgeries back as far back as when I was 15, and I didn't heal well back then. Big wormy scar, raised, always was redder than the skin around it, so it's very, very visible. And within about 6 months of using the patches, all of it subsided. It is now a pencil line, and the color has blended in so well at this point that you have to look for them. If somebody just saw my foot, they would never see the scars. I'd have to show them where they are, and then you can find that little pencil line. So just some remarkable changes happening within the system of using it. Of course, wound healing is critical, and I'm going to show you some great pictures of what it can do there. Here's a boy who was in a bad car accident with a severe laceration of this hand. He cut nerves, and they weren't sure that that hand would ever work fully again. You can see his patch right here in and it's beginning to heal quite well. This is 63 days later. Now, obviously we can see the damage, so we can follow that scar and see where it used to be. But for the most part, and the best part is he got full utilization and feeling in all of his fingers. And that's in 63 days. Here's a little 9-year-old boy who had the tip of his finger cut off in a door, slammed in a door. It just pinched the tip of the child's finger off. They were able to sew it back, but without blood flow, it began to turn black, certainly no feeling. And then after, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead one time. And after a period of time using the patches, this is what his finger looked like just a few months later. Full recovery, full nail regrowth. You can hardly see the scar on it. And he's got full utilization of that finger. That's something the doctor, after it was turning black, wasn't sure what ever happened. They thought the finger was going to basically rot back off and he would lose the tip. But some of the regenerative effects of improving stem cell activity. And you say, well, he's a young child, he's 9 years old. So, he's full of stem cell activity. He is, but remember, the GHK copper peptide doesn't reach its full potential in our system until our age 20. So young children are still immature in their production of the peptide, which then hampers some of their stem cell activity. We get our peak activity right in that 18 to 22-year range, and then it begins to fall off. So even in children, we can stimulate the production of the peptide and improve stem cell activity and healing in small children. Youth renewal just in bringing back a more youthful skin, and changing genes, modulating genes back to where they were, which is so important in, like we talked about, rheumatoid arthritis and other allergic reactions. How many people have you known never were allergic to anything before, and all of a sudden they have allergics to this food, that food, different pollens, and it can remodulate those things over. I've had somebody with a peanut allergy, could not eat peanuts without having to use an EpiPen to save himself. And after 8 months of being on the patches, can now, and he didn't discover this, well, he discovered it by accident because he wouldn't have eaten it, but he ate something that he found out later had peanuts in it. And as careful as he is, I guess those things happen, and he had no response to it. And that's what made him realize. And then with under supervision of a doctor, they tested that, and he's no longer allergic to peanuts. And the great thing is he loved peanuts, and it was always a problem because he couldn't eat them. He's back to eating his peanuts. Remodulations of genes. So billions have been spent on stem cell research and treatment. LifeWave global sales. In 2018, this is before the X39 came onto the market, LifeWave's annual revenue that year was $20 million. So as I said, they were a 15-year-old company, very successful, singly owned by David Smith. There's not stockholders. Now, it's not a publicly traded company. He answers to himself. The farmers tried to buy him out. He's refused. He is on a mission. The company, and it is growing like crazy. Here comes 2019, the release of the X39. Business went from 20 million to 70 million. In 2020, when things got a good run and start, sales exceeded 220 million, and they're continuing to grow at exponential rates. They're expecting within 3 to 5 years to be over $1 billion worth of sales. So this is a company certainly on the move. The great thing is it's affording this kind of therapy and help to people all over the world and is readily available. We would love to have some people who will tell their stories afterwards. and share this so that more and more people have the opportunity to take advantage of this. So lives are certainly being changed. Now, in the very beginning, one of the first slides we talked about is that the GHK copper peptide exists in a slightly alkaline body. As the body becomes slightly acidic, the serum blood levels drop off dramatically. Even if we're producing it, it doesn't survive in that acidic solution. So being slightly alkaline is critically important. And also, here's another problem. As we get older, our bodies are holding on to different acids, and we're going to show you how that works. And so being hydrated is critical. So we know that water and sunlight, necessary things for the existence of life. We're getting the light waves from the patch, from the infrared our body produces. Now we got to put the water in. Even slight dehydration changes performance potential. For every 3% of dehydration in a cell, the cell loses 10% of its ability to do work. We don't get thirsty until we are 10% dehydrated, meaning at that point, our cells have already lost 30% of their functional ability. Now we see that in an athlete, they're playing ball, they're sweating heavily, and we see their performance over a few hour period begin to decline because they're dehydrating cells that can't be hydrated quick enough with the conventional things that they were drinking to try to do that, and their product. But let's think of it a little bit different than just physical activity. Let's think of the fact that our heart's beating every minute. It's pumping, it's a pump. We get dehydrated, we lost 30% with a 10% dehydration of its ability to pump. Our liver is purifying, our kidneys, all of our organs throughout our body are all cells that are trying to work in an environment, if dehydrated, at a far less ability. So it's critically important to hydrate ourselves. Now, add to the fact that the processing in order to purify water to give us availability of water all the time changes the structure and the charge on the water molecule, which reduces our cells' ability to absorb water that we would normally drink. So we're getting hampered that way. Now, obviously, we have to purify water. We're not going to drink Mississippi River water down here or different waters that are contaminated. Has to be done, but just note it does change the structure of the water and consequently our ability of our body to absorb that water. So typically the waters that people are drinking, cells within their bodies only absorb about 15 to 17% of that in a 3 to 4 hour period, which leaves most people chronically dehydrated all the time. Think about that.
Glenn, I think you froze.
The internet certainly isn't being very helpful here.
Okay. Let's see. Hopefully he'll recognize it.
Not sure there's much he can do, Desiree.
Did we lose him? I think we did.
How long ago did I lose you all?
Okay. Glenn, are you still there?
I am. How long ago did I lose you?
Just like
Okay, seconds ago.
just a few seconds ago. It wasn't very much.
Okay, let me.
You were talking about how processing water changes the molecule.
Okay, all right. Let me go back on and we'll get started again.
Thank you, Tom.
Left off. Okay, all right. So, like I said, since the copper peptide is pH sensitive, bringing our body into a slightly alkaline state, which is where it should be, will give the ability to reach optimum blood serum levels and maintain those. But how do we do that if we're not getting the right amount of water into our cells? Well, there are some processes. So here we go. Nature takes care of that process. When let's think of photosynthesis in a plant. A plant takes water in, it takes minerals up into the plant, and through the process of photosynthesis, which is an electrical process, molecules into their individual atoms versus being in clusters, and suspend that into solution. It also separates the molecules of a mineral, bringing it into an ionic solution. We eat the plant, we get minerals and water in a structure and minerals in a state that allow us to utilize them. It happens also naturally in nature in other mechanical ways. Water rushing down a river, over rocks, let's say a mountain stream. The mechanical action of the water, the friction on the rocks will begin to tear molecules apart and separate them, releasing different charges to charge the water into a negative charged state. That process is referred to as electrolyzed reduced water. Glaciers that are grinding on rock, another mechanical process that the water underneath the glacier is full of these charged water particles. So let's look at a water molecule and let's talk about how that process works, and that we now have that kind of technology allowing us to put a machine right on our countertop next to our sink and take tap water and bring it back to where it was before the purification process changed it to a position that we can't utilize. So here's our water molecule, 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. If we produce the energy necessary, we will begin to split some of that. We will actually split some of these hydrogens off of the water molecule. And we do that by the electron fields that are around the oxygen begin to fill in, and they're no longer sharing that electron that's spinning around the hydrogen. So the hydrogen breaks off. H1, one hydrogen atom, or number 1 positively charged, is missing electrons. So it is oxidizing. It will try to steal an electron from an associated nearby cell or atom. And if it's negatively charged, it has an abundance of electrons that actually have overfilled some of its valence bonds and allows it to donate them. So it's considered an antioxidant. It can donate an electron to one that's missing. So as we electrically start splitting this water molecule up, we actually produce 2 different flows of water. One of them is going to have more and more of these positively charged hydrogen atoms. And we know that if we fill a solution with hydrogen 1, that solution becomes more acidic. What happens to all of the rest of those after we pulled all of that hydrogen off? Well, in some cases, we may have pulled both hydrogens and we end up with an oxygen atom, which is negatively charged. We can also fuse 2 hydrogens together, produce H2, which is very different than H1. It is a negatively charged molecule. I'll tell you the importance of that shortly. And then we produce this, an OH, an oxygen with just 1 hydrogen. That OH hydroxyl ion is extremely negatively charged. And then of course we have some water molecules in this side. Because this water is missing a lot of these H1s, it becomes alkaline in pH. Now, it has nothing to do with alkaline water, because alkaline water simply means water that has alkalizing minerals in it. So we could take tap water, which is neutral in pH, and add a tablespoon of baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, and we can make that water alkaline. It does nothing for allowing, and I'll show you that here in a minute, that water to enter our cells and dilute acidity that's forming in our cells. So how does that process work? So let's look at a cell. And our cells on the inside are negative charge. And they have to be in order to conduct electron flow. Our brain sending signals to the cell by electron flow. So if we don't have a negatively charged inner cell, we can't conduct electron flow. The cell can't get brain signals. It stops working. The exterior of the cell is very positively charged. And as important is the membrane, the aquaporin membrane that allows fluid in and out of a cell is extremely positively charged. It's nature's way of stopping oxidizing fluids from entering the cell because it will oxidize and do damage to the cell. So when we purify water, the process of doing that causes a loss in electrons. So consequently, these water molecules are attempting to share some of those electrons, and they begin to cluster together in large clusters of 16 to 32 molecules. Sitting outside the cell, number one, it's larger than the membrane, so it is very difficult for it to fit this big chunk into a little hole. That's very evident and easy to comprehend. It's also positively charged. So as it approaches the aquaporin, the membrane, it's going to be repelled, like pushing the two ends of a positive magnet together. So the cell repels it. And it does so because positively charged is oxidizing and it's carrying acidity. We're going to produce enough acidity through normal metabolism and burning of energy. We don't need to add it. So it's nature's way of stopping some of this stuff from actually entering the cell. So when we unfortunately do this to the water, we're creating a structure of water that is not viable for our system to use. Now, as we metabolize food, one of the waste products, the ash per se, as we burn fuel, is positively charged hydrogen atoms. And because the inner lining of the cell wall is negative and they're positive, they stick to the wall. Two things begin to happen as we accrue all of this extra positively charged hydrogen atoms. What did we say a few minutes ago? As we add positively charged hydrogen to a solution, we increase its acidity, we lower its pH. In this case, the cell will become acidic because it has so much of this hydrogen stuck to it. And because it's stuck to the wall, it doesn't readily leave the cell. It builds up over time. It also neutralizes the charge on the wall of the cell that it's stuck to. So the cell loses its charge over time, making it less responsive to brain signals, and so it doesn't perform well. If it's a heart cell, it's not beating strong enough, congestive heart failure, lowering in heart rate, all of those kinds of functions. The other thing that happens is as we begin to burn fuel or continue to burn fuel in the cell, we're now burning it in an acidic environment, and acidic environments have lower abilities to hold oxygen. So now we're trying to burn fuel in an oxygen deprived scenario. So think of your gas stove. If you have the proper mixture of air to gas, we get a pretty tight white blue flame that is utilizing the energy or the fuel very efficiently. It's burning it at an efficient rate. It produces very little waste or ash. But if I don't mix the right amount of air with the gas, then you get this big old yellow meandering flame that is very inefficient burn of that fuel. It's burning, but very inefficiently. And if we put a pot over it, it'll slip that pot in a second because it's putting out massive amounts of waste. So we begin to exacerbate the problem within the cell. Lower oxygen, cell doesn't perform well. It now is burning fuel at a oxygen deprived situation, so it's producing a lot more of this hydrogen waste. So we build acid rapidly in the cell. So let's take, how do we remove that acid? Well, first of all, we got to hydrate the cell. So now let's go back to our electrolyzed reduced water, where we have negatively charged water molecules, these negatively charged hydroxyl ions, and some great little negative charge oxygen. First of all, since all of their electron valence fields are full, they separate. They are individual atoms and ions. They are not clusters like is over here. So they're small enough to fit through the membrane. Second, they're negative charge and they are being drawn to the membrane because it's positively charged. So they readily enter the cell very easily. So instead of on this side, us taking 15% absorption over a 2 to 3 hour period, we're getting 98 to 99% absorption in 3 to 5 minute period of giving the ability to hydrate that cell very quickly and efficiently. And as these things go into the cell, these hydroxyl ions have a stronger negative charge than the cell wall does. So they will actually pluck these hydrogens back off the cell wall, producing a water molecule. When the water leaves the cell, it takes all of that acid waste with it. Now the cell is not being overburdened with all of this acidity. So the natural buffering systems of our body have the ability to do their job and not be overwhelmed. So, a doctor will tell you your cell pH is controlled by your body, and that's absolutely true. But we can overwhelm that process and it can get behind, and that's where we get acidic cells and acidic waste buildup. So by alleviating all of this acid waste out of the cell, two things happen. We, number one, bring the cell to a ability for its pH buffers to balance it, bring it into that slightly alkaline scenario. So now it's full of oxygen, so it's burning fuel very efficiently. So we get an energy boost when we have this kind of water in our cell. If we ate a bunch of watermelon, that water in that watermelon is structured like this, and we get those same effects. We get the energy from that. On top of the fact we get rid of all the acid waste, and we're burning fuel efficiently, and our pH, our cellular pH, is slightly alkaline, which allows the blood serum level of the GHK peptide to reach its potential, and we get higher and greater stem cell activity. On top of the fact that, remember, stem cell is a cell. So if it's dehydrated, if it's full of hydrogen, it's not performing well either. Even though we've stimulated it to perform, it's dragging a leg. It's not performing at a high impact. So this kind of water is the way to hydrate. And we now have the ability to take care of that. And the negative charge is also an antioxidant. One of the things we talked about 2 pictures ago on this picture, this H2 that goes over to that drinking side because it's also negatively charged. What is the most oxidizing ion in our body? It's an oxygen atom that's lost electrons. It's positively charged, and it's oxidizing, and it's stealing electrons from everything it can get to. When we have 2 hydrogens that are negatively charged and a positively charged oxygen, they pull the hydrogen in, it neutralizes that charge. We now have a water molecule, and we've alleviated that free radical oxidizing material. There's your strong antioxidants that come from it. And unlike foodborne antioxidants that have to be fully digested and absorbed through the intestine wall to become readily available to us as an antioxidant, and unfortunately, as our bodies become acidic, some of the bacteria necessary in our intestines to break them down to release that potential or pH sensitive, and they die off. So we eat all of these antioxidant foods and never achieve the antioxidant potential because they're never broken down. This water produces this in an almost instantaneous format and allows our body to be constantly bathed in antioxidants, reducing inflammation due to free radical damage, improving hydration, transporting food and oxygen and all of those things, which water does. It's the solvent that brings all of that stuff around. So this is also a critical point, and we've proven that with our customers and people we work with. People who are drinking this structural water get far better results when they start using the patches, and much quicker results. And it's because all of their cells are working in harmony at their proper efficiency level. So you can talk to whoever invited you to this call about this also, another very important point. And if you've got inflammation, the reduction in inflammation that just this structural water can give you is tremendous, as well as all of the peptide reduction in inflammation and the rejuvenation of cells and modulation of genes, all working together to bring your body in a more useful state. So that is my presentation for the evening, and I'll stop this share and more than willing to answer any questions anybody may have had.
Wow, Glenn. Every time I say it, but every time you do this presentation, I learn something. I didn't hear before, even though I know you said it. And the one thing that really was, I was like, oh, I never heard that before. And that was when you talked about how when people have rheumatoid arthritis, that stem cells actually have the ability to fix the cartilage that has been damaged and also to stop that negative side effect of the cells eating each other.
Yeah.
And that was like, whoa, that's so huge, really huge. That amazing. So I would like to just share one thing that happened to me, which I was so amazed at. So I have always bruised really easily, and I had fallen, and I fell like this. And when I fell, both hands, like the whole palm of my hand, was like immediately black and blue. Within 3 days, from Friday to Monday, totally healed and gone. It was like, I have never, even my daughter goes, that has never happened. Usually that lasts forever. And that was incredible. It was just like, wow, the power of these stem cell patches. So anyway, I want to open it up to anyone who has any questions. Glenn is open to hear what you have to say.
There was one posted in the chat, Desiree.
What,
Jada wanted to know if you would be willing to share your presentation. And that, I don't think she was talking about just the presentation, but you know, the PowerPoint.
yeah, I'd be more than happy to. I can send it to you and you can distribute it to whoever wants it.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. I have a question. We know that we can't diagnose or talk about diseases here, but I know someone who has a growth at the L4
Mhm.
and has been in and out of the hospital over a period of time. And I was wondering, so at this moment, they're ready to do surgery, but they're trying to just figure out how they're going to do it. So she started to put the X39 patch directly on that area. And she's having difficulty relieving herself, so the person has a catheter right now and so on. So do you have any suggestions?
Well, especially if they're going to do surgery, I think it's a great idea for her to be using the X39 because it takes a little bit of time to build up in the system and begin to activate the stem cells. And having them all activated at the time of the surgery will certainly improve her recovery rate. And
Mhm.
I would suggest that the second she gets out of surgery, get another patch going. It can't hurt. It won't interfere with any of the medication she's on or any of those things, because again, we're not putting anything into the body. So it's perfectly safe for her to use. And the quicker she can get all of that going, she goes in with everything active and then comes out and keeps it going, she will heal much, much quicker. Now, she can use some of the other patches also. I would suggest the glutathione patch. Build up the levels of glutathione in the system also before surgery and after, and probably Eon.
Okay, that sounds like a good one. And so do you have an idea where you think they should be placed?
Well,
Well,
remember, with the X39, the glutathione, and even the Eon, Eon and glutathione have some specific spots that they show you in the pamphlet for certain issues. But they're all, and especially X39, they are systemic. So no matter where you put them, they're going to systemically raise the blood serum level of these things. But there are some spots that are better than others. That first infrared picture I showed you, that spot on your back, they recommend right below C7, which is the one that bumps out if you lean your head forward. Put it right below there. You're in one of the warmest spots. Your body's giving off probably the most heat of anywhere else in the body right there. So you're reflecting that much more back into the skin. You produce it a little quicker. And then right below the belly button for the same reason. You've got a tremendous amount of blood vessels there from your original umbilical cord in the neighborhood of like 75,000. And it's a warm spot on your system, your body also, because of all the activity happening in the gut. So you improve that process really good in those two locations. You can alternate them, or if it's close to, not once the surgery's done, get it up in the close to the wound in that area. She's going to have C3 or 4. It's up in the neck. Go ahead and put it at the C7 or right below the C7 and get it as close to where you need it as possible.
So we have a lot of people bragging on you as well. And just, what a wonderful presenter you are and how you
Oh, I
just,
hope to be able to present it in a way that you can understand it and it all makes sense to you. Colleen, you had a question. I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
It wasn't necessarily a question. I just, for some reason tonight, either I've just haven't heard it before, or you just said it for the first time. And it's probably, I just didn't hear it. And it's something I've been wanting to hear because people ask it every single time is, what's in the patch? And tonight you just said it so eloquently. And it was like, blah, 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 and I couldn't write it down very fast. But it was great the way you said it.
I'll repeat it. It is a plant-based crystalline structure. It's an amino acid crystalline structure that is encapsulated in 2 layers of plant-based cellulose, which is why they don't interact with you. Very few people get rashes or anything from it because it's basically cellulose. It's not latex or any of those kinds of things. But it doesn't allow what's in the patch to touch your skin.
Right.
So light goes into it, it refracts it into its individual wavelengths, reflects back the one that we want to stimulate the activity, and away it goes. But it's also why they recommend 12 hours on and 12 hours off, because any part of our skin that's stimulated continuously, it begins to lose its ability to operate. We have day and night because there's things that happen at night when in our dark cycle and things that happen during the day. And if we didn't have the night, we wouldn't respond the same way as the sunlight hitting our skin during the day. So it's that same thought process. And it's also why I, a lot of times, will put it on the back of my neck one day and on my stomach the next day. I'm not stimulating the exact same tissue for well over 24 hours from the time I took the last one off, but I've still got some other area of the body that's producing it. But if you produce it 24 hours a day, then you never give your body a rest and it starts getting used to that and it doesn't respond as well. So the 12 on, 12 off is important. Now, I'm not saying that if you put it on at 7 and you're watching something on TV or you're getting off this call and it's 9 o'clock and you go, oh my God, I'm 2 hours over. It's going to hurt anything. Just take it off at that time. If you forget one on and realize it the next morning, just skip a day or definitely put it in a different location. Or a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just take one of the other patches and use it that next day in a different location. That way I'm not doing the exact same stimulation because I got a different frequency of light going back into the skin, so it doesn't recognize it the same way.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, that just, it was just said so well. And it was like, wow. I mean, because everybody seems to ask us like, okay, well, what is in the patch then? It's
And
like this secret little formula.
No,
and it was
that's important
wow, that was
to know, They want to know what they're putting on themselves and whether it's
right. And I haven't been able to really explain it well. And it was like, you just said it. And it was like, wow, I've just missed it each time, I guess. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Somebody asked in the chat, is boiling water the same as electrolyzed reduced water? And the answer is no. You are adding energy to the water, and that's what does separate the molecules to some extent. But it doesn't change the overall structure. It has to be an electrical process that will, and mechanically, the electrical process like friction we were talking about with the river or the glacier happens because of static electricity. You understand that. You can produce electricity by releasing electrons through static electricity. And that's exactly what happens in a lightning strike. If lightning hits the water, the charge hits the water, so it definitely will electrolyze the water that it hit. But what causes the lightning? And that's air flows in opposite directions, and the friction of those produce all of this static electricity that ultimately come in and cause the charge to build up to a point where it'll reach out and grab the ground. So, and what happens inside of a plant, we think about a solar cell. You got things of electricity. Well, that's exactly what's happening inside of a plant. The chlorophyll in the plant is actually absorbing energy waves and producing an electrical charge that does the same thing inside the plant. So that's how we end up with electrolyzed reduced water in the plant, as well as the minerals separate from their clusters of molecules into individual atoms, which is the way we're designed to absorb minerals. So we get the utilization of the mineral that is in the plant. But if we took an elemental supplement, we don't get the utilization of that mineral. Well, one other thing that happens in that process of restructuring the water is because you're charging it and putting this charge into it, you also bring all of the minerals that come over to the drinking side into an ionic state, making all the minerals that are in our tap water usable by the body rather than not being usable because of their original state. So another great benefit. Anyone else?
I have a question, if you can hear me.
I can, Michael, go ahead.
My wife has she's had a little bit of a reaction to medication she's been taking for a long time. So it's for heart, and her heart is actually beating. It's still in an acceptable range, but in comparison to what she used to be, it's like going really too high and up close to 100, and she does have a problem with it beating in rhythm. I don't know if you have any suggestions for something like that.
Well, again, I'm not here to diagnose, that's our doctor, but just what you said, remember we were talking about as a cell builds up acidity, it doesn't function as well, and it quits getting proper brain signals, so it doesn't beat as strong. Is she on a pacemaker, or does she have a pacemaker, I should say?
No, she doesn't,
Okay.
but that's the consideration that's coming up the road. So she's on a monitor right now.
Right. Yeah, and because a pacemaker will hit it with a charge far in excess of what our brain does. So even if the cells have lost some of their charge and they're not conducting electricity in the small amount of electricity that's coming through from the brain, if we hit it with a much stronger charge, it will beat. But if I go back to what we've tried to explain during the water process, if we can get that acidic waste out of those cells, they will start performing much better. The medications are trying to regulate that, but in a totally different, not getting to the root cause of the problem. The water will alleviate the acid waste, allow the charge to come back to the cell. It can then read brain signals much easier. It will improve, in addition to being able to burn fuel better and everything else, it'll improve that beating. And I've had people with congestive heart failure where they're on a pacemaker and still the heart is just not squeezing hard enough. And so they're not pumping enough blood around. They're starting to get fluid buildup because they're just not able to pull it all off because of the low blood flow. And over time on the water, they've been able to clean those cells up, regain their charge. And again, you're taking the assault off those cells and giving the body its ability to naturally heal like it would do. And all of a sudden their heart rate, not the rate, but the squeezing ability, the refraction rate on the heart cell improve, and their pumping gets far better and alleviates a lot of that problem. So, if we can alleviate the assault and get rid of the root cause of the problem rather than just manage the problem, well, then our bodies do the job that they're designed to do, and they heal themselves. And then, of course, we add the X39 to it, which then gives it a real boost in its ability to heal. That whole process happens faster also.
Yeah, we've had great success with the X39.
Mhm.
She's her eye glaucoma specialist canceled a scheduled surgery that she was going to have in 5 days, basically because I started some different X39 protocols,
Mhm.
and
Well,
I brought them in.
You see, you're giving the body its tools it needs to heal, and it's responding. Now, if you can get rid of the assault, and that's where the water comes in, then now a lot of its tools aren't being used up to fight that same inevitable problem. You got rid of some of that assault, all of that acid, all of the things that are causing part of the underlying problem, and the body will heal itself, and you'll see great results. So I would talk to somebody and add that electrolyzed reduced water to your regimen. You'll see remarkable change in the effectiveness.
We do have a 501.
Okay, great. All right, then make
Yeah.
sure you're drinking that like crazy. And but again, proper expectations. All of this didn't get there overnight, and it doesn't fix itself overnight. And the older we are, the more damage has to be repaired, and the longer it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the doctor said she looks 20 years younger than what she really is, and she's quite a bit older than me.
Well, you know what? That isn't happening by accident. It's things you're
I
doing.
appreciate
It's things you're
what
doing.
you said.
Okay, guys,
All righty. Well, much appreciation. Thank you so much.
you bet.
Michael, you really do take excellent care of your wife. She's very blessed,
Good.
very, very blessed.
I'll
Glenn,
do what we do for loved ones.
you were so amazing, and I think that there are no further questions, so we'll call it a wrap.
Okay,
We're
that
so
sounds great.
grateful, Glenn, that you come once a month on the first Tuesday of every month, because this really has been so it explains everything in a way that we can understand it. And, we're able to invite people to the calls so that new people, or prospects can really start to go, oh, now I get it. And like I said, even Colleen picked out something she hadn't heard before.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like a new book every time I hear you. So thank you so much.
Let me relate it to, and everybody will understand this. First
Okay.
time you watch a movie, you don't know what to expect. You're looking at the big picture and you're getting parts of the movie, right? And you leave the movie with a general understanding of what went on. But if you go back and watch that movie a second time, now you know what to expect. You know what's coming. So you're actually looking a little more broad spectrum into other things that are happening on that screen that you weren't aware of before. And little things come out that you didn't see the first time. And if you watch that movie 5, 6, 7, or 8 times, you will see new things every time until you finally see it all. And that's what's happening with these general calls. I apologize that I'm not able to be on these calls every week, just to be part of what you all do every week. And thank you, Desiree, for that. But Tuesday night is a conflict night for me. So I made it once a month. I called this out to be able to do this. But unfortunately, I can't join you all in the other 3 weeks. But every once in a while, I grab in, but unfortunately not all the time. But I'm grateful to be part of the group on these monthly calls.
Well, thank you again, and y'all will be seeing each other next week. And Glenn, you have a very blessed month.
You
Thank
all have a
you.
great one too. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good to
Bye,
see you.
everybody.
right.
Love y'all. Thank you.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Good night.